Hey, how you doing? Justin here. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to play the A shape major grip. Learning how to play this one is just one of those challenges that every guitar player is going to have to face at some point. It is a little bit tricky, but in this lesson, I'm going to give you every tip and trick that I know to help you get there. If you've tried before and found it a bit of a struggle, make sure you stay tuned for all of the different variations as well, because one of them might be the one that works for you. We are, after all anatomically a little different. You might find one of those variations particularly suits your hand shape. Pretty much everyone I've ever taught these chords to has found them pretty challenging to start off with. It's something that takes just a little bit of time. You need to develop the finger strength in the right places and the muscle memory to be able to jump to the chords. Weirdly though, they're actually a lot easier than people think, and there's just a couple of kind of challenging things about them, and once you understand what those are and you can start working on them, they should come together fairly quickly. So let's go through a couple of those challenges and the easy things first of all. So here's the grip. The first thing that people often struggle with is getting the first finger to play the root note clearly and also mute the thicker string. Now, if you're confident with your root 5 power chords already and you've been practicing them, you shouldn't find that too much of a hassle, because you should have been practicing muting the thicker string while you're playing your regular root 5 power chord. The second challenge, and the one that most people seem to find difficult when they start, is that the third finger has to hold down 3 strings in a little mini bar and lift up enough to mute the thinner string. Now, there are some variations where you don't need to hold down all of those 3 strings with the third finger, but I don't think that they're the best approach for most people. My recommendation would be is to accept the challenge of doing the finger 3 mini bar and just work on it. It's going to take a little bit of practice, but it's a really useful technique that you're going to find helpful for other chords down the line as well. So my recommendation would be to stick with it, especially when you realize something else about this chord that is really easy, much easier than people think. And that is, it's actually not a bar chord in the correct sense of the term, because the first finger is only actually playing that one note. It's muting the thicker string, playing the root note on the 5th string, and the rest of it is just it's muting. It's not even its sole job is to mute it. If it was a little higher, it wouldn't matter. The third finger is playing 3 strings in a row and then a mute. So actually the first finger's role is just playing the root note. That makes it significantly easier. Now, let's go into a little bit more detail about how to get started with this chord. So let's work on this C chord. This is a C major chord using an A shape. The most important thing here is the root note. The root note is found on the 5th string. Whatever note that first finger is on is going to be the name of your chord. This is a C major chord because this note is a C. If we moved it up 2 frets, this note is a D, so that becomes a D major chord. Okay, if we moved it from C down 1, would be a B chord. Okay, so first thing to get together is getting your first finger down on the 5th string with the tip of the finger touching the thicker string. You don't want to go too pointy there with the first finger, or it won't reach the thicker string. So a little flatter than you might think, the tip of it just lightly touching that thicker string so it's muted, and then getting a nice clear note on the 5th string, so making sure it's nice and close to the fret. It doesn't want to be too far back, right next to but not on top of the fret. So the challenging part is going to be getting that third finger in the correct fret and also right up next to the edge of the 5th fret, okay? If it's far back, if you've got it in the 5th fret but too far back, you're going to get a lot of this. You're going to get like buzzy stuff and the notes won't ring out clearly. So you are going to need to get that third finger right up next to the frets. Remember that the frets get closer the further up the fretboard you get. So if you really struggle with the C chord, if you're like, my finger just won't stretch that far, move it up. Start with an E chord. So put your first finger up on the 7th fret to start, because the fingers are going to be closer together. Or even right the way up at the 10th fret to a G chord. It wouldn't really matter. I'm showing you on the 3rd fret. I think that's a good amount of stretch for most people. But if you have to move it up a little bit, don't be stressed. With a bit of practice, your dexterity will improve and you'll be able to work your way down to playing that C chord. Okay? The third finger, the challenging part, as I mentioned, is holding 3 strings down and lifting up enough to mute the thinnest string. There are some variations where we play the note on the thinnest string, but I'm not going to go through with those with you right now. I think this is the best version for most people most of the time. It is going to be challenging, but stick with it. So third finger into the 5th fret, get it up as close as you can, and the key thing is the placement of this knuckle here, right? It wants to be really far forward. I'm going to try now and wiggle around a bit to show you some different camera angles. So can you see now how far forward that knuckle is? It's way far forward. Okay, if I try and get that finger out of the way, it's not this. It's not like the fingers are all wrapped around and the third finger is wrapped around like flat like that. That knuckle, this one here, the middle knuckle of the finger wants to come right far forward away from the fretboard. So here's another view for you that might help you see how far up that knuckle is. Okay, that knuckle does, I don't normally tap my little finger like that, by the way. I'm just trying to keep it as clear as I can so you can see that finger. It's this, it's not that. It's not pulled around, it's that knuckle's coming right far forward. Okay, so it should be further forward than either of the other fingers. Right? If it's too flat like that, try bringing your hand, try and push that knuckle forward away, and you'll find that there's going to be a sweet spot where if it's too far down, like that, you're going to get that thinner string, lift it up, there we go, it's muted. Okay, so keep testing that thinner string until you get the mute. Now, there is a certain amount of experimentation that needs to happen when you're learning to play this particular shape. We're all anatomically different. Some of us have more flexible joints. Some of us have longer or shorter sections between our knuckles. All of those things are going to play into this. So you need to experiment and see. You will be able to do it. I've never had a student yet that's been unable to figure out how to play this chord. Some students will take a little longer to be able to get it under their fingers, but everyone's got there in the end. However, as I mentioned, there are a couple of common variations that you might like to try if this one really doesn't work for you. But I'd encourage you to please stick with it for a while. Don't just go, oh, too hard, and then straight away go on to one of these variations. Stick with it for, I would say, at least 2 or 3 weeks, really trying to get that third finger to bend back enough to be able to play that chord correctly. So here's the first variation, the one that I call the traditional approach. First finger is playing the root note just the same at the 3rd fret on the thicker string. It needs to mute the thicker string, but it also needs to play the 3rd fret on the thinner string. So it kind of makes a bit of an arc there. I don't recommend trying to press it down to play all of the strings. It's just a waste of energy. So allow your first finger to be a little bit round to play the 5th string and to play the thinner string. Now fingers 2, 3 and 4 go down on strings 4, 3 and 2. They all have to cram down into that same fret. And there are people that are going to find that a little easier to begin with. Now the tricky thing with this is getting to it. If you're going to go from an E-shape bar chord to an A shape, like it requires a moving of the hand. Like I have to really I have to move everything about. It could be a little bit because I haven't practiced it a whole lot because I don't think it's the best grip. So I think maybe if I practiced it heaps, I could probably get the chord changes a little faster, but it's definitely harder than this. If you look at the movement there to go from an E shape to an A shape, which is really common, you can see 3rd finger just kind of falls down, 1st finger sort of slips. It's a lot easier chord change than this to that. That's just awkward. Because it's harder to get to, it's often slower to get to, so it makes your chord changes feel a little bit more disjointed as well. The thin string to get clear is also kind of tricky for a lot of people. The 3rd finger, the little finger rather, lays down a little bit too flat and it ends up muting the thinner string anyway, which may or may not be a good thing. Like I said, I actually prefer the sound of that 2nd string being the top note of the chord. So if you are using this approach and you're muting the thinner string, that's okay. I wouldn't be worried about that particular aspect of it. I do think that using all of your fingers up, though, limits some of the possibilities for other chords, particularly a dominant 7th chord and a sus4. This 7. I think it's a great little grip for a blues chord. It's something we're going to cover later in this module. And the sus4. Again, really, really common variation that you find in pop and rock. So I think there are many advantages to using that third finger bar. But yeah, if you really struggle with it, you might want to at least try out that traditional approach. The second variation is this one. I call it the pinky approach. Now, there's something funny about this one in that my little finger doesn't bend back at all, like the way that the third finger does to be able to play this chord like that. My little finger just won't bend back. It's not designed to do that. My little finger is kind of short. Now, the way I use this one is I put the third finger down to cover those strings, and my third finger sits on top to play those three, and it just happens that I can mute the thinner string that way, right? So I quite often use this one if I'm feeling lazy. This one feels a little bit like it takes more effort than this. For some reason, it just enables my hand to sit a little flatter. I find it a little easier in some circumstances to play that A shape that way. Now, what I do see a lot is that people can use their little finger, they keep all of their hand like that, and their little finger, this knuckle, can sit up. I'm going to have to try and I can't even make myself do it. Like that kind of thing. No, there we go. Slightly done it. Like that. So I see people doing that, and I think it looks really comfortable and easy. I just can't do it. So you might find that if you go to try and use your little finger to do that bar, that it's just like, oh man, this is much more comfortable. I would rather be doing that. If that's the case, then sure, it's a good thing. You've lost the ability to use the sus4 chord, but again, if you're going to use that, it's even easier. It's just hitting the 6, which I didn't want to do, but that transition from there to there, I just can't do it without the support of the third finger. But you might find that that's a good variation for you. This is definitely something that you should explore. I'm not so arrogant as to assume that the way I play guitar is the only way or the best way. What I aim to do is to teach people the way that I think will work for most people most of the time. But do experiment and find your way as well. Quite often people do things in an unconventional way, and it's quite brilliant. James Taylor is my favorite example. If he'd come to lessons years ago, I would have looked at his technique and go like, that's not how you play an A or a D chord. What are you doing? But he's one of the finest guitar players to ever walk the planet. So who am I to say that the way he's doing it is the wrong way? It's just a different way. So do feel free to experiment. Like I said, I'm trying to give you what I think is the best approach with the most options for progress further down the line, but it might not be the right one for you. So please do experiment. I'm going to give you 3 exercises that I'd recommend that you do if you want to get your A-shape major bar chords down. The first one is putting it on and taking it off again. Sounds pretty simple, right? So let's say we're going back to our C chord. We just take your hand off completely and then you put it down. First finger, third finger, and then check. Muted string. Nice clear root note. Note, note, note. Muted thinner string. Take it off, put it back on again. Mute, clear root. 3 notes, mute. Take it off, put it back on again, right? You want to get used to the muscle memory of just being able to form the chord and put it down right away. That would be the first exercise. It's pretty much the kind of the chord perfect exercise that I give out in my beginner's course for open chords. Same kind of thing applied to a bar chord. The second exercise is to practice doing what's called a 3 chord trick. That would be playing a G chord using an E shape, moving it over to a C chord using our A-shaped major bar chord, moving it up 2 frets to the D, back down to the C, and back to the G. Now this movement from like the G chord to the C chord, so E shape to A shape in the same fret, is really, really common, as is playing songs with a 3 chord trick. In whatever, maybe it goes G, D, C, D, or whatever, but there are literally thousands of songs that use these chords, this 1, 4, and 5 chord. So it's a really good thing to practice, either just like doing G, C, D, C, this progression. If you get bored of doing that, you might go G, D, C, D. But just getting used to the shape of those 3 major chords, kind of programming them into your musical imagination as well, so that you'll start to recognize them when you hear them on records. And the third exercise, which is possibly the most challenging, is going from an open chord to an A-shape major bar chord. It is definitely a little bit more challenging, but again, something that you're going to find is very common. The first one I'd recommend is going from an E major chord to a B major chord. This again, really, really common thing that you're going to encounter in just lots of different songs. So open E, and then having to jump first finger, third finger, and of course it's second fret, so it's quite a big stretch between the first finger and the third finger there. Another common chord that you find mixed in with open chords is the B flat chord, which is even more stretchy than the B. In fact, it's the biggest stretch that you can get using this shape. It's very commonly linked with a D minor chord. So going from a D minor to a B flat. Just moving between those two, really good exercise. If you encounter a song that goes from an open chord to any other bar chord, just pull out that one change and practice it over and over again and work it up so it feels as easy as your other chord changes. This little idea of 1 minute changes I teach in my beginner stuff really, really works when you've got any sort of challenging chord progression. It's something I still use to this day. If I encounter a chord that I find really difficult, I go from the chord before into that one over and over again, then the tricky chord to the next chord over and over again, and just work on it until it gets as smooth as all of my other chords. Exercises can get a little tedious after some time, so of course I would recommend that you work on some songs as well. So search out songs that use the A major bar chord shape and practice them. If you're finding anything tricky, work on it. Just work on that one chord change and then gradually work you up to playing the whole song. Now, interestingly, this major shape is by far the hardest chord in this A shape bar series. The next one, the minor chord that we're going to look at, is really, really easy by comparison. So don't feel like you really need to master the A major shape before you move on to this minor chord, because it's actually a lot easier, and there are many songs that use a mixture of the major and the minor bar chord grips in the A shape that are great ones to practice. So I'll see you for the minor chord grip very soon. Have yourself a fantastic day. Bye-bye.